Hey guys, how's it going? It's Danconia and welcome back to the Overwatch League Roundup 2020 Week 15 Meta Preview. So, this week's hero bans are actually going to be really interesting because they're going to have some significant effects on different teams and it's going to be interesting to see how they react to them. But, last week we had Ashe, Reaper, Reinhardt and Brigitte banned, and it saw basically two different comps dominate. It was the Sigma, Orisa, MEI, or it was the Sombra, Tracer, Dive. Some teams had more success with the Dive, some teams had more success with the Bunkerish comp. But one thing that was notably absent is the dominance of Echo. We saw Echo dominate in week 13, but she didn't come back to dominate in week 14, although we did see Echo played. So, obviously the inclusion of McCree and Widowmaker had a significant impact on Echo play, and we did see some Widowmakers coming out, especially on Junkertown, and taking the heads off those Widows. So, yeah, it's going to be very interesting, plus also the map pool has changed, which meant that some comps have become more viable than others. But in week 15, things are going to change up, because both of the comps we saw last week are going to have to change in some way because of the hero bans that have been introduced this week. One of those comps in a pretty major way. So, we will start off with our supports, as we always do. And last week we saw Brigitte banned, and this week she'll be back in the hero pool, obviously. But this week we will see Moira banned. It isn't the first time that Moira has been banned. And we did see quite a bit of Moira last week. We saw Kariv actually popping off on the Moira with Toronto Defiant. But there have been quite a few Moiras around in week 14. And so the AI has decided to ban her and bring the hammer down. So Moira, she very often benefits from rush comps. She very often benefits from deathball comps. She was used a lot with the Orisa and the Sigma, if I'm not mistaken, and not really used all that much with the Dive, because basically, with the Dive you want more ranged healing, and so you go for the Ana and the Zen, and sometimes the Lucio, because he can dive with the team. So, Moira is more used to those deathball-y comps. Now, obviously Reinhardt comes back this week, and Reaper comes back this week, but they are certainly going to be interesting, because with the other bans that we're going to see this week, it means that the traditional comp is literally impossible to run. The what you would call meta right now, if you had all of the heroes available, like you will in the MEI tournament, you'll have all the heroes available, and during that tournament, one certain comp will be dominant unless we see major changes to the strength of certain heroes. But this week makes that pretty impossible impossible to run. So it's going to be very interesting to see how people react. Now, moving on to the tanks, we are going to see Orisa banned this week with the return of Reinhardt, obviously, as I mentioned. So, Orisa, again, integral to that double barrier comp that we saw a lot of last week if we weren't seeing the Dive. So, this means that Sigma is a little bit less likely to be played. Remember that D.Va is still around, and when generally we see Reinhardt, we see D.Va at the moment or Azaria. So, it is still possible to run double barrier if a team wants to, because they could Rein Sigma, but it's much less likely, I think. So Orisa being out of the pool is going to be a kind of nasty for some teams, I think, especially London. London were heavily reliant on the Orisa Sigma last week, and it won't be there this week, and they got to take on Shanghai, and well, we all know how good Shanghai are. So, it's going to affect some teams more than others in my opinion. But, Orisa is going to be a big miss for some teams. And it will force them back to the Reinhardt. Or it will force them to the Winston and more divey comps. To take London for an example, I would probably expect them to resort more to the Reinhardt and put J-Mac on that. They didn't seem that confident to put Jihan into battle last week. Although they might do. Jihan is well known for his Wrecking Ball. But then again, he's also well known for his Orisa. So, yeah. But Bernard then would be able to gravitate back towards the D.Va, which I think is his strongest suit as well. So, yeah, there's going to be teams that react differently to the Orisa ban. There's going to be teams that aren't affected because they wanted to run Dive anyway. Yes, I'm looking at you, Houston Outlaws. Yes, I'm looking at you, Toronto Defiant. But there are going to be some teams that will say, well, it doesn't bother me, we'll run whatever, we really don't care. And then there's teams that I think could suffer slightly, like Florida, like London, I've already used as an example, but some teams have got easier schedules than others. I'd expect Florida Mayhem to pull through against the Washington Justice, not gonna lie. But, moving on to the DPS, and this is where it always gets very spicy, Of course, Ashe and Reaper are back this week. Whether we will see any Ashe over the Widowmaker and the McCree, I don't know. We did see in week 13 Ashe used, and in week 12 we did actually see Ashe used even though McCree and Widowmaker were available. So it is possible we see Ashe come back, but I wouldn't say she would come back to a massive extent, because the one thing that Ashe is going to suffer from is the dive from Echo, because she's going to struggle to hold her own against an Echo compared to a McCree. Remember that McCree can flashbang. Ashe can coach gun, but it doesn't really punish the Echo, it just gets the Ashe out of a hole. So McCree can actually punish that Echo with the dive, if he's got the reactions to her dive. But this week, we are going to see two very impactful heroes banned that we saw a lot of in week 14. So it's going to be Tracer, and remember, Tracer was integral to that Sombra Tracer dive, hence the name, and MEI. MEI, obviously, integral. She is possibly one of the most powerful DPS in the game right now, Blizzard. And, well, yes, she is one of those meta heroes. If I was going to bet on a meta that you would see in the MEI tournament, I would bet on McCree and MEI, with maybe Reaper MEI making an appearance as well. But it would revolve around MEI, because that's what most of the stuff does when she's in the pool. And some teams have used an absolute metric beep ton of MEI this season. So when you look at London, again, I'm using them as an example. Was there a point at which they didn't use MEI last week? Again, Florida. Florida used an incredible amount of MEI, but they did use Tracer last week. Both of these hero bans severely impact what Yaki has been playing in recent times for the Florida Mayhem, so it'll be very interesting to see how he adjusts. But with these bans, I think if they're going to play dive, if the teams are going to play dive, I think we might see Sombra Echo. I wouldn't be surprised. So that could be quite interesting. In terms of the more deathball-y comps, MEI makes it, well, the MEI ban makes it very difficult. But it also means that other heroes can succeed a bit more. We saw New York Excelsior struggle with a dive with Who Are You on the Genji on King's Row last week. And this actually would be more viable now than it was last week, because MEI isn't in the pool, and MEI is just such a massive pain in the backside to Genji. So yeah, we could see more teams run dive, and I honestly wouldn't be surprised with it. Obviously the caveat to that is McCree being in the hero pool, but obviously McCree was around last week as well, and teams were not adverse to using the dive. I still think teams are going to stick with Sombra, and honestly I think teams will still run that Sombra dive, but I think they'll just substitute the Tracer out and either pick up a Genji or they'll pick up an Echo, more likely Echo. But there are teams that are going to really suffer from this, like Seoul. I'm going to be very interested to see how Seoul react to this, because again, another team that they actually showed quite a bit of flexibility last week, running both the Sombra Tracer dive and the MEI deathball-y sort of comp. But both of those comps are going to be awkward right now for Seoul to pull off in week 15 against Chengdu. They're lucky they're playing Chengdu, probably the worst team in Asia considering they got swept by London last week. And in all respects, if Seoul do get forced onto the Echo Sombra dive, which would be interesting to see, Seoul have looked absolutely atrocious when playing Echo. So they're going to have to come up with something. I'm going to be interested to see if there is a deathball comp that emerges that just substitutes something in for the MEI. I don't know what you would sub in for the MEI. Maybe you would go McCree Reaper, but there's nothing quite like MEI in terms of area denial and that just oppressive freeze. And it'll be very interesting to see what teams do, because we haven't actually seen MEI banned all that much recently. But we should see MEI banned more often now that the hero ban system has been changed, and it will be taken into account the Overwatch League play usage, and it will only be enforced from 3500 upwards in terms of SR on competitive queue, but that's not coming for a couple of weeks anyway, so we don't have to worry about that. There are no hero pools in competitive right now, but the hero pools in the Overwatch League will be based on the Overwatch League, which I think is a pretty good thing, instead of getting this McCree Widowmaker ban all the time. So, I think we are looking at a very interesting week of hero pools because there are some very, very impactful bans. This could be the week where we've seen the most impactful bans so far. MEI was meta last week, Tracer was meta last week, Orisa was meta last week, and Moira were meta last week, and really major parts of the meta last week. So it's going to be very interesting to see how these teams react. I think some teams are going to suffer, some teams are going to do well, and I think it might be a bit unfortunate for the likes of the Spitfire because Spitfire have got a game against Hangzhou Spark, and if they were to run the comp that they were running last week, I think they'd win. But without the MEI, I'm very interested to see what they come out with. And also, it's going to be a test for the likes of Florida Mayhem because it's really not in their ballpark, this meta either, and Seoul Dynasty, to see if they've got anything up their sleeve to not fall back into that echo trap that we saw them fall into in week 13. But that's going to be it for this one. So, thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you liked it, give a like, subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you in the next video. See you then!